Hi, I'm Patrick Miller with Ampere Industrial Security. I'm the CEO. I'm here in beautiful Orlando, Florida with my good friend Carter Manucy. Tell us about yourself, Carter.
Thanks, Patrick. So Carter Manucy, Florida Municipal Power Agency. I'm the IT, OT, Cybersecurity Director here at Florida Municipal Power Agency in Orlando. Great that you're able to see me here in person in my own backyard.
I know. Nice. I was in town for an event, so it's a good thing you brought me here. So we're here to talk about NERC CIP. And of course, this is the transformational regulation that really kind of set the bar for cybersecurity and physical security in the electric sector. That standard, it's monumental. It's actually been around for 20 years. So we're going to celebrate 20 years of NERC CIP, right? So with this 20 years of NERC CIP, I think back to where I was 20 years ago. I was at Pacific Northwest Utility, and they were like, hey, we think there's some regulation coming down the pike. Kind of go take a look at this stuff. And this was the FERC SMD was kind of what started all this. And it came out of an old Clinton era decision directive from the president. Yeah, that was where we kind of started to understand that our world was really about to change. So where were you 20 years ago when all this started?
So 20 years ago, I was still at FMPA. They're 26 some odd years now, so it's been a bit of an adventure. But I was the IT manager at the time, and so I was gleefully unaware that this thing was coming down the pipeline. A lot of my focus was on corporate security and networks and all these other things and firewalls and virtualization at the time even. So yeah. That's been around for quite a bit now.
Still around.
Still around. I didn't see a lot of the news hit my desk until we started talking about fines and what was going to happen with the regulations if we didn't comply, and not just in the CIP space, but even in the OMP space. They didn't have the concept of that fining component to a lot of the regulation. And that's where the knock came on my door, was when folks were really concerned about that, and also needing folks to get involved with what's going to happen and understanding, because a lot of the people that were initially let on for this stuff were not the ones that would have had to implement it.
Right. And that was, before NERC CIP, everything was voluntary and basically collaborative. There wasn't any real teeth or force to do it. And I remember when that shifted, it was really difficult for me to get my utility to embrace the fact that this was now federal law. It wasn't just this, kind of international standards body that said you should do these things. It was you must, or you're going to get penalized.
Yep. And declaring your own stuff is critical as part of that.
Yeah. The choose your own adventure.
That was certainly a problem. So,
yeah, definitely. So, okay, so my CIP life started at basically just trying to help the company figure out what this new FERC motion was going to look like. And then I got attached to the Critical Infrastructure Protection Advisory Group and NIPSI, the National Infrastructure Protection Center with FBI. And then we got into like the early drafting stages and did the implementation with the utility for a while, which was really interesting. Taking a company that's 100 years old with different systems, trying to figure out how we're going to get this thing through the new, what would be the CIP kind of mesh sieve,
right,
to actually becoming the first CIP auditor in the country, and then trying to figure out how we're going to audit this new thing that no one has ever done before. And then now, of course, we're on a lot of the same working groups and committees together, which is why I wanted you to have this conversation, is you are, now I see almost every NERC CIP thing that's out there, you are somehow attached to this. And I know you've got a day job, but all of these NERC CIP things, tell me how you kind of got into this and how you are now just like woven into the fabric of how this is unfolding.
That's a great question, because sometimes I ask myself that same thing. But it all started with the transition of into NERC CIP and getting involved with FRCC and some of the committees there, and then listening to the conversations that were going around. And I'm like, why are you guys trying to do things like this? It just didn't make sense to me, coming from a networking and security background and everything else. Like, it would be an awful lot easier to secure things in this way. And then the conversation would the room would go quiet and people would think, and we continue on. And well, we need you to get more involved in these other efforts where we're having the conversation. Could you do drafting teams? And
yes,
drafting teams were a whole different commitment. And I considered it for version 4, but it was such a time commitment above and beyond everything else. But the other things that happened was, now we need you to get involved with CIPSI. So at NERC CIPSI we had voting committees, and we had different groups in there, and we want you to do the cybersecurity side for CIPSI, and getting involved in drafting the CSSWG, the control centers,
control systems
security
working group, yeah.
control system security working group efforts on writing white papers on how to do firewalls. I mean, some basic things sometimes, but how do you do that in a compliance space? And then as CIP evolved even more and those conversations happened more, then we had trade organizations looking and asking for help and doing things. Well, Carter, come on in, could you help educate, And I was always looking at this like, why are you asking me? You guys are reading the same paper, right? And it seemed like we were all reading the same paper, but somehow I came to a different conclusion as to what the end result would be. And I don't know if it was a crystal ball, but everything ended up gravitating in that direction. And so that started a snowball effect and more. And then we end up with other, shared facilities. They seem to be a huge issue down in Florida for whatever reason. A lot of our members had that same problem. So we had, noodled on that concept within the Florida region for a while. And so I brought that forward and said, started pounding the table. It's like, guys, this is a national issue.
Right.
We need to figure this out. So, write a white paper. Why don't you? So I almost voluntold myself to do a lot of this stuff.
So like no good deed shall go unpunished.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And the next thing you know, it's 20 years later, and here we are talking again.
Well, the industry owes you a huge debt because you've done a lot of really good, sane, balanced, level-headed approaches to help steer this standard in the direction it's gone for the better. So thank you.
Yep.
When you started to implement this, did you think this was going to succeed? How did you think this was going to go?
Yeah, that was really interesting because the first involvement that I had was folks saying, "Hey, we need more people that know IT involved in a lot of these standards and compliance." And I had no idea what I was getting myself into at the time, but ended up with a lot of things within FRCC, our region down here in Florida at the time. Hey, can you get more involved in these meetings? Can you find out what this NERC CIP thing is and help out our other member utilities that we have that do have compliance obligations? We don't think we're going to have anything yet, but that might change, and that did eventually happen further on down the line with NERC CIP for us. But the direct impact was a lot of our members in the larger utilities. Those were the first cut for a lot of this stuff. But yeah, that was my involvement, was just wondering what that world was going to look like. Did I know that this is what it was going to turn into? Oh, heck no.
No.
But I do distinctly recall having a lot of conversations about cost and implementations for those utilities that were deeply in it and the unknowns.
Yeah.
And this is coming or it's not. I got to go to my board for more money or I don't. And that back and forth was, I know, put in a lot of gray hairs for a lot of folks.
Yeah. No, I saw a lot of the same. I mean, I knew that we were going to be regulated, and I was just curious to see if it was going to stay the CIP standards, or if this was this really the thing that we were going to end up living with for the rest of our utility lives. If you remember the early days, we were talking about, do we need like a generation standard and a transmission standard and a control center standard, because the differences in those types of systems and assets. And we ended up with kind of a one-size-fits-some, and we've shaped it and molded it over the years, I guess, to kind of embrace all of those things. But yeah, I remember when this first started, I was really wondering, okay, did we set off on the right path? Did we actually get this going in the right way?
I think we've changed a lot, and how we do things. Did we get it right? Probably not. There's a lot of things we could do a lot differently to actually focus on security versus compliance. But in hindsight, this has made improvements in the industry. So did we make the right decisions? Perhaps.
Right. It gets a lot of, we'll say, mixed press, I guess, the CIP standards do. And I'm one of the biggest, I helped write the darn thing. I was the first CIP auditor. I give it a lot of noise, but it's also worth celebrating the successes that it had. It actually did move the needle. What are some of the things you think are good successes the standards actually gave us?
Well, I think for sure it raised awareness.
Yeah.
Hands down. We've got now people actually implementing security and not so security things within our industry that never would have moved otherwise. So that is definitely one of the better things. We probably going to use a different framework to do a better job of doing things a little differently. But in the end, that's what moved the needle, was everybody has to move forward.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that time and time and time again. And as time evolves and things change, that's proven itself out, I think. And we're starting to see that even with the low impact stuff now, is the needle continuing to shift and bringing folks along.
Yeah, I was talking with Earl about this, Earl Shockley, and he was mentioning that his math shows that at least 50% of the standards are constantly in draft and being changed and modified to adapt, that's interesting for a utility that's used to things not changing very frequently. So it puts a lot of, I guess, strain on keeping up with the target.
Yeah, and it's a strain of that and a strain of not having anything definitive that you can look to. And you would think that with that, after 20 years, we would have had some kind of a steady state here going on.
Yeah.
Which we, we don't.
No.
We're still struggling with subjects like virtualization and remote access and some of these very fundamental things we still haven't figured out. And then we're still fighting, quite honestly, with a lot of the how to do patching properly and is this the right thing or not? And those are unfortunately the battles that we're having and the energy that we're spending on compliance is in things that may or may not be the best way of securing a facility.
Right, or really maintaining reliability, which is what the goal is at the end of the day. Yes, security is there, but it's really there to support that reliability kind of mission. Okay, so where do you think this is all going in the future? So maybe 5 years, 10 years out, is it still going to be the CIP standards? Is it going to be something else? Will the standards change so much that they look different than they are now? What's your crystal ball, pure guess for where you think this is going to go? Or I might say pure guess, you've been in this long enough. What's your educated opinion on where this might go?
I think we're going to shift a bit to more of the NIST standards to try to get some kind of for the whole industry to do the same thing. And it shouldn't be power being any different than chemical, oil, gas, water, pipelines. Why do we think we're so different? Why are our assets so much, we use different electrons to run Windows in a power plant than we do in the water facility? I don't know. But that's where it's going to go. Now, I think technology-wise, that's helping us get there. We've got better tools at our disposal. We've got better vendors able to help us meet a lot of these unknowns and visibility becoming a key. So I think that's where we're going to end up is that hopefully we have ability to show compliance through monitoring so we don't have to do as much on a day-to-day to prove that state was true 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last month, whenever. And I think that's what we need to get away from to actually make it so we can focus on the reliability component instead of it being...
So more of a control objectives, control tests, and then continuous monitoring approach.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to go that way. And we've even seen some messaging within like the National Security Memorandum where they talked about we want a common set of metrics for those 4 or 5, electric, as you mentioned, electric, gas, chemical, water, and wastewater. And that they were leaning toward NIST 882, which of course is the overlay onto 53. I can't argue with that approach. I can't say that's a bad idea.
I don't think it's a bad idea either to have that standard of standards.
Yeah.
And if we could all focus and all march along the same lines and we don't have to remember 15 different revisions of 5 different things and, which version are we on and which one's actually, oh wait, no, that one was voted down and then we got this one to replace that one and all the issues that were going on with that because in reality, this is a bigger problem than just one industry.
It is. And I think it would help normalize even the discussion because we're now using the same words, the same frame of reference. It would help the vendors. It would help the assessors. I just think it might make life a little easier. It's going to be difficult for our industry to think past the CIP standards to something else. I mean, are we going to have a window, your guess, of course, your opinion, are we going to have a window where we have to do both, the CIP standards and something like NIST? Or?
Well, I think that if we're smart about it, what would end up happening is we would have one transcend the other.
Okay.
But I have lived through the version 4 off and on and all the other consternations of these things happening, and it never is clean. It's never pretty. So I'm going to go on the record by saying it will be a train wreck, but we will get there.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting train wreck of a transition to something else if and when we actually do.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate the insight. And hey, let's do some more 20 more years of whatever this new thing looks like.
I'll be here.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick.